Hey all, welcome back to Awful Stories. I'm Matt, and make sure to leave a like and subscribe for daily videos. The first story we're going to cover is titled, My Husband is an Addict. What Should I Do? This was posted to the relationship subreddit by a user named Former Translator. My husband has been addicted to drugs for about 2 years. Last year, I noticed he would constantly become angry over the smallest things or get overly annoyed with our toddler. He opened up to me about his addiction and told me he had used cocaine a few times to get through the stress of his job. He said it was only a handful of times and promised he was not doing it anymore. I believed him and let it go. As time went on, he began to act very erratic. He was constantly angry, argumentative about everything, and struggled with parenting our children. One day it came out that he was still using drugs, but he refused to believe he was the problem and blamed everything on me. One night, he blew up so badly that I feared for the safety of my children and myself, so I decided to stay with my mother. While we were separated, he became worse. He took my car and sold it. It was in his name because I was a stay at home mother. The house was foreclosed on, and I received texts and calls every day with him calling me names and demanding custody of the children. I eventually gained full custody through court. 6 months later, I noticed a major difference. He began talking with his sponsor every day, attending meetings, working the steps, and was very apologetic, taking full accountability for his actions. Before his addiction, he had been an amazing husband and father. Because of that, we decided to work on things and move back in together about 8 months ago. Things were going well until last night. Although things appeared fine, I still struggled with trust issues. Last night, I went through his phone and found that he had been reaching out to old friends, asking for Adderall, cocaine, or meth. I woke him up and asked if he was sober. He admitted to leaving work one day to meet an old friend and said they used heroin together in the car. He claimed it happened only once, and that the others he contacted never sent him anything. I do not believe him. I told him that he would need to be consistent with meetings, stay in contact with his sponsor, and take random drug tests at home until I felt comfortable again. But after thinking about it, I wondered, what kind of marriage is that? Watching your husband urinate in a cup every few days to prove he is clean is not the life I imagined. Part of me wants to walk away from all this, but part of me feels guilty. I would feel guilty because I know he is a good man, and addiction is a mental illness. We have two toddlers he loves dearly. I suppose I am just looking for insight on what to do in this situation. His mother is mortified by his actions, but believes I should not leave, saying our marriage is worth enduring this trauma. My mother, who does not know about his recent relapse, tells me to leave and move on with my life. When is enough truly enough? Am I being too lenient and enabling him by staying? Update: I have read every single comment and deeply appreciate all the advice, support, and insight, even the ones that were hard to read. I also want to clarify that the relapse was with meth, not heroin. That may not make much of a difference, but I wanted to be truthful. I told him I want him to leave and that we should live separately for now. When he asked about a timeline, I said I was unsure, maybe a year, but I am not certain I will ever go back. He was upset, saying I'm making too big a deal out of one slip up and that our family is not worth breaking apart over it. I still feel guilty, but I'm determined to stand by my decision. Flock of Seagulls commented, You should leave. This isn't the life your children deserve, nor you. Automator said, Here is a realistic way to think about this. If losing his wife, children, house, and car to addiction was not rock bottom enough for him to change, how much deeper will he drag you before he reaches it? To this Vicious said, I agree with this. Honestly, if this were me, I would tell him he needs to complete an inpatient program for a minimum of 3 months and then remain sober for 1 year before I return with my son. I told my husband, who will have been clean for 10 years this December, that if he ever uses again, I love him but will leave if he does not get help after a relapse. He understands that. But considering this is the second time, I do not know how long it would take before going back with the children, if at all. Regardless, he needs an inpatient program. The second story for today is titled AITA. For telling my brother that the day he was born was the worst day of my life. This was posted to the AITA subreddit by a throwaway account. Context: I was born in 1962 in a rural area, before ultrasound machines were common. The nearest town was far away, and babies were typically born at home, delivered by the same midwife. When I was 7 years old, my mother became pregnant with twins. She had no idea she was carrying two babies, and the midwife, who had just delivered the first baby and likely did not realize another was coming, had to be immediately driven by my father to another farm where she was needed. That meant that when my mother's contractions started again, I was alone on the farm with her and the first newborn baby. It was up to me to deliver my youngest brother under my mother's guidance. It was Without a doubt, the worst and scariest moment of my life because I was terrified that both my mother and the baby might not survive. Thankfully, everything worked out in the end. Now, here's what happened. Last weekend, my husband and I were celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary. During the party, guests made speeches about us. When it was my brother's turn to speak, who of course has no firsthand memory of his own birth and only knows the story as it was told to him, he decided to share that event as if it were a humorous anecdote. And then my dad came home, and there were two babies instead of one. So funny. Anyway, thanks, sis, for helping me come into this world. Everyone laughed and found it sweet, but for me, it was the opposite. It brought back deeply unpleasant memories. My mood shifted immediately, and my brother must have noticed because he came to talk to me afterward. He asked if he had said something wrong, and I told him that it was not a funny story for me, that the day he was born was, in fact, the worst day of my life, not something I wanted to recall during a happy occasion like my marriage celebration. He went quiet and said, "Wow, I was trying to honor you, and that's how you took my speech?" The thing is, I never meant to say that his birth itself was a bad thing. I love my brother deeply. It is just that the circumstances surrounding his birth were traumatic for me, and he should have realized that retelling it as a fun fact might be hurtful if he had considered my perspective. Still, part of me thinks I should have stayed silent, even though it bothered me. The innocence of a fun anecdote about a surprise twin birth turns into something heavy and haunting when you're the one who had to step up as a terrified 7-year-old delivering a baby without any help. It's no wonder the memory isn't wrapped in a shiny bow of nostalgia, but instead lingers as a trauma that refuses to fade. Imagine the clash of perspectives. OP's brother sharing what he thinks is a sweet, lighthearted story to celebrate the family, while you're left wrestling with fear and helplessness from that day. It's a painful reminder how trauma can shape how we experience even happy occasions, and how sometimes the people closest to us don't realize that their words can reopen old wounds. And then the internal debate about whether to speak up or stay silent. That's a classic dilemma for trauma survivors. It's hard to balance protecting your feelings with maintaining family harmony, especially on a day meant for celebration. OP needs to get some therapy and sort out this trauma he still carries. Koi Fishy said, YTA for how you phrase that. I do not know how anyone is supposed to respond to being told, the day you were born was the worst day of my life. If you had said, the day you were born was very traumatic for me. I was terrified that you and mom would not survive, it would have conveyed a completely different sentiment. Blue Bumble commented, YTA. How else was he supposed to interpret what you said? According to your posts and comments, he had no reason to believe it was a traumatic experience for you. People have a wide range of emotional responses to similar situations, and he is not a mind reader. A simple clarification, helping mom give birth to you was traumatic for me. I was terrified that you or mom might not survive, would have made all the difference. To this garden said, it does seem a little idealistic to believe that a 7-year-old delivering a baby would not find it traumatic, or at the very least, not simply a fun story. I agree that the original phrasing was unkind, and your wording is much better. However, I do not think it requires mind reading to understand that the experience must have been frightening and intense for her, and likely not something she enjoys recalling. This third and final story is titled AITA, for asking why my coworker wears makeup every day. This was also posted to the AITA subreddit by a user named Spare Garden. I am a 29-year-old man, and this happened at work during a long meeting with a few coworkers. One of my coworkers is new. She's a woman in her late 30s, and the conversation shifted toward our professional experiences and backgrounds. Pretty standard stuff. Partway through reviewing some dull material, this coworker looked at me with a smirk and asked, "Can I ask you a question?" Since we had been talking about work, I said, "Yeah, sure, what's up?" She followed up with, "Why do you always wear hats?" To be honest, I'm bald, but I like being bald. I started losing my hair at 21 and decided to shave it all off instead of trying to style it to hide it. My hair had always been very curly and tight, so covering it up was not really an option. Back in college, people liked the look, said I had a great head shape, and even compared me to Terry Crews, Shaquille O'Neal, and sometimes The Rock. Not sure about that last one. I was confident about it. When I turned 25, I started getting mistaken for 30 because of the shaved head, so I began wearing hats more often. I built up a collection for every situation: work, the gym, social events, basically everywhere except weddings and funerals. With the hats, some people guessed I was as young as 22. Not my goal, but still. My plan was to wear them until I turned 30, and then ease up once my look matched my age. Anyway, this coworker asked, "Why do you wear hats every day?" To be fair, It's a corporate environment, but we work in tech and marketing. It's 2025. And our office is smart casual. My bosses wear hoodies and hats sometimes, so no one cares. I said, I like hats. And she replied, but every day? So I said, yeah, I'm bald. I like my head shape, but I don't want to look 35, so I wear hats for now. Plus, I look good in them. I realize now that since she's probably around 35 or older, that might have unintentionally offended her. She responded, 29 and wearing hats every day to hide? Wow. That struck a nerve, so I said, well, since you joined, I've noticed you wear makeup every day, even on casual Fridays or during remote work calls. So why do you wear makeup every day? There was a muffled giggle, but the atmosphere got tense. She got upset and said, that's a sexist question. I replied, how? Other women in the office don't wear makeup every day. And my boyfriend sometimes wears makeup too, when we go to classy events. He just doesn't do it daily. So, why do you? She went silent, visibly angry. One of the other coworkers quickly redirected attention back to the presentation. Since then, she has not spoken to me, and it's clear that things between us are strained. Butter and Rich said, she was being inappropriate, but you were at work. The way to come out of that interaction clearly is to say something like, as interesting as it is, I think we've talked about my hat enough for the day. What's everyone doing on the weekend? Not to be equally weird to prove a point, there are no air horns, and nobody's going to clap. To this, Pierce Tunge said, the amount of pussyfooting here is unbelievable. She didn't like having her hypocrisy pointed out. If this were written by a woman about a man asking her the makeup question to begin with, you all would be calling him a sexist asshole.